Hey guys, it's Pete from Leisure Time here. Today we got another episode of What's Wrong with My Hot Tub. Today we are looking at a Sundance hot tub that is leaking 2 to 3 inches a week, which isn't a lot, but it's a significant amount that we want to see what's going on here. So there's a few spots that I always look at anytime there's a leak. One of them is around the circulation pump. Another place we can look at is the big drain valve down here. You can always check around your flow switch up here or anywhere where hoses connect. You can check your unions on the jet pump. The face of the jet pump where there's a seam and it connects here. You always want to check that out, and at first I thought maybe it was leaking from that. But after further inspection, I found that it is the shaft seal that's in between the wet end and the motor. Anytime, I've already got my pump set up to drain out the window there. But anytime you drain your hot tub, you always want to turn the breaker off. Alright, we're gonna get that going. So the tub is all empty, and we're gonna start with the left-hand side pump over here. Pretty much what we'll do is take each part off, pull the pump out, take apart the wet end, and remove the impeller, change the shaft seal, and put it back together again. First thing what we'll do is remove the hose clamp on the air bleeder line over here. Next thing I like to do is actually remove this nipple, because this is going to make it easier to remove the unions. Now what I'm using here is an oil filter wrench from Harbor Freight or any automotive store. It does a good job at grabbing onto those union nuts. Once you break those loose, then you can use your hands to spin them off. Okay, now that that's taken off, let's do the same thing to the other side here. Got the pump down here on the ground. I'm going to take a Sharpie. I'm going to make a mark right here where one of the studs comes in, right across there and on the black part of the motor. And then up here where I'm going to split the face of the pump off the rest of it, and that way that kind of gives me an orientation when I go back together again. So we're going to remove all the screws from the front. That wet end will just pop right off. There's an O-ring. Always inspect your O-rings. Alright, so now we want to break the impeller loose from the shaft, and on the back here you should be able to stick a flathead screwdriver in there to kind of hold the impeller in place. Okay, so the impeller is seized on the shaft, so now our next step is we actually have to remove the 4 studs that hold the wet end in place here. That's one of the reasons why I made the mark across there. Make another mark where the stud is on the pump there too. Okay, so those 4 studs now makes our wet end up front here loose. What I'm gonna do is take another flathead screwdriver and a hammer. I'm just gonna tap that out until the front pops off, and now we have the armature out of the motor. Alright, as soon as I pull off that impeller, this will pop off. One way of checking your bearings, see if, because I mean obviously moisture is going to get in there, hopefully not too much has gotten in there, but I just give that a spin. It spins pretty easily, it's not squeaking or anything, so our bearings are looking pretty good. This one in the back, it's not rusted or anything. And typically water doesn't get all the way to the back of the pump, it's just this one here in front. So that bearing's probably okay, we don't need to worry too much about it. Then we want to inspect our impeller. Pull off the old shaft seal. So we got a bit of a crack on the impeller sleeve right here. So there's two things we can do. One is just replace the whole impeller. If we're in a tight spot and we can't get a new impeller, what I'm going to do is, so this part of the impeller sleeve isn't super important as long as you can still get a new shaft seal put back on, because that's what makes the seal between the water in the wet end and towards the shaft. So this crack only goes back probably right about here, and what I'm going to end up doing is just getting my grinder cutting wheel and just cutting that right off where it has started to crack, and that way the crack doesn't keep going. You also want to look at which shaft seal we want. There's three kinds of shaft seals, as long as we're not working on something that's super old. The three main ones are a PS 1000, a PS 200, and a PS 201. And the way to tell the difference is when looking at the impeller sleeve. If this sleeve were to go all the way down and be the same size, same diameter all the way down to the impeller here, then it would be a PS 200. That's the smaller one. The larger one, as it comes down, it tapers a little bit bigger here, and that's the PS 201. The PS 1000 is kind of a weird shaft seal because it actually switches where the ceramic piece goes. So you're going to have the spring on the impeller over here, and then on the wet end you have the ceramic that is inserted in there. Well, on the PS 1000 they switch that, so the ceramic part goes on the impeller and then the spring actually goes into the wet end. Typically Sundance doesn't use that. Some of the hot springs do, but right now this one is a 201, and I'm guessing that the one over here is probably also a 201. So okay, so I've cleaned off the impeller sleeve and I've made a mark there. That's where I'm going to make my cut. That way I know it's beyond where the shaft seal goes, but it's far enough down that we're getting enough of that crack so it doesn't continue. I'm just going to use a little screwdriver to clean out that gunk in there, so it threads onto the shaft with no problems. Shove a rag in there and clean it out real good. So that's ready. Next thing, we're going to take our wet end portion. There's a ceramic piece here, and then there's like a rubber piece just inside there, and we want to remove both the rubber and the ceramic piece. So I'm going to set the flathead screwdriver on top of the rubber part and then just give it a tap out. Pops right out, and just throw that away. So I did grab two shaft seals, the PS 200. This one's made by US Seal, but I only had one of those, and I have this other one. It's made by Aladdin, but it's a number 201. They're pretty universal as far as shaft seals go. They use the same numbers. Doesn't matter which manufacturer you get. I'm going to take the ceramic portion first. I'm going to grab a tube of super lube, and that's just going to help slide the shaft seal into place without it binding up. I just get a little bit in my fingers here. I can smear that on the rubber part. Don't need a whole lot, just enough to lubricate that enough. It slides right down. You want to make sure it's sitting flush and it's seated in there properly. Check both sides. Then we're going to take the spring portion, and there's a little rubber seal back here. I'm going to lube up with that, and I'll even grab the impeller sleeve and put some lube on that as well. And that's just gonna slide right on there. just like that, and that should sit flush against the impeller. Now before I go back together, I'm also going to grab our armature here. But I'm trying to clean off the threads as much as I can and use a little bit of that lube to go on the threads. And that way, in the future, if we have to change the shaft seal again, our impeller doesn't get seized up. So, remember I made my line on here, and then I made a line on this one too. There's our line. So I lined it back up. I'm going to take the impeller, spin that on, make sure that's tight and that this can still spin freely. Again, line up your lines where it is on the motor, and that's going to make it easier for the studs to go back into place where they're supposed to be. Okay, when I tighten down these studs, I'm going to turn the torque on my screw gun down pretty low just to start out with. So I start out pretty light, and then I can slowly move up on this particular screw gun. I'm going to go about 14, 15 torque, and that's enough to keep those tight. Now we're going to put the face back on, but don't forget about your O-ring that goes right here. On that O-ring, it might be hard to see on camera, but you're going to have a smooth side, and then you're going to have kind of a ribbed side. There's a groove on the inside of that. The groove side wants to go down towards the wet end here, and then the other half, you know, the smooth part's going to be facing the other part of our piece that comes in here. Also on your wet end, you might see how it's rounded, but then there's a flat spot, rounded, and then a flat spot. That's another good indication for orientation too, because this other half can only go on one way. You got to hit both flat spots. I'm going to put those screws in. I'm going to go like a star pattern, like you would the lug nuts on your tire if you were changing a spare tire on the car. Go crossways. I'm going to go back over with just a regular hand screwdriver, and I can tighten those up one by one, giving them a good amount of torque, because you have easier time judging how tight those should go by hand than you can with a screw gun. There we go. So those are all hand tightened down. We can throw this pump back in. With our unions here, it'd be a good idea to inspect those O-rings too. Always, over time, those get flattened. They may not make very good seal. Throw a little bit of super lube on that stuff too. So when I'm putting the unions on the pump, I don't like to tighten everything down all at once before moving on to the next one. So I just want that thread started while I try to line up the other one, get those threads started, because you want a little wiggle room once they're hand tight. Then take your pliers, snug them down. That one should be done. We can move on to the other one over here. I'm just going to do the same exact thing here. This particular motor is a little bit different than the other one, but we're going to remove this plastic cap back here. This impeller looks pretty good. I'm not going to worry about slicing anything off there, but I believe it still has the larger PS201. Same thing. Put it face down, put your flathead screwdriver on the rubber portion, tap it out. So again, line up our lines, the marks that we made, and then take the impeller. put the back cap back on. Let's take a close look at that. If there aren't any cracks and it's not breaking apart in your hands, then I mean it's probably still a good O-ring. Now the screws that were on the bottom here, they've got a lot of that calcium and stuff. What I like to do is switch those and put them towards the top so they don't get more corrosion happening if there's a leak in the future again. That's going to help keep the screws in good shape, last longer. You don't have to end up replacing the whole wet end, or if you can't get a wet end, you have to replace the whole pump altogether. Tighten them down by hand. And then use a filter wrench. Really give them a tighten down. And put our air bleeder nipple back on. Some might ask if I need to put Teflon tape around these threads here. As long as there's a good O-ring on there, you really shouldn't need Teflon tape. Just a little dab of lube on the O-ring. Keep it lubricated, doesn't crack over time. And that just snugs down until you can kind of see that O-ring squish just a little bit. And now we're ready to put water back in it and test it. Okay, so we filled the tub back up again, got the pumps back together, and we're just going to check them out for any leaks. All good to go there. We're all set here. I'm going to get the panels put back on, buttoned up, and then move on to the next job. Thanks for watching.
Thank you for watching another video at Leisure Time Inc. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for future videos.